The writer and commentator Frank Deford is an author of 16 books, which is just amazing to me. Everybody's All-American, and Alex, The Life of a Child, a memoir about his daughter who died of cystic fibrosis, have both been made into movies. His latest novel, Bliss and Remembered, is a love story set in 1936 Berlin Olympics and in World War II. On the radio, Deford has been heard as the commentator every Wednesday on NPR's Morning Edition, and on television, he's the senior correspondent for the HBO show Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. In magazines, he is the senior contributing writer at Sports Illustrated. As a journalist, he has been elected to the Hall of Fame of the National Association of Sportscasters and Sports Writers. 6 times, Deford has been voted by his peers as the U.S. Sports Writer of the Year. The American Journalism Review has likewise cited him as the nation's finest sports writer, and twice he was voted as the Magazine Writer of the Year by the Washington Journalism Review. The Sporting News has also described Deford as the most influential sports voice among members of the print media. And the magazine GQ simply called him the world's greatest sports writer. In broadcast, Deford has both won an Emmy and the George Foster Peabody Award. ESPN presented the television biography of Deford's life and work, You Write Better Than You Play. He resides in Westport, Connecticut with his wife Carol, and they have 2 grown children. With that, Fritz, if that's okay, I will introduce Frank Deford.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. Not often that any writer can be so presumptuous as to say I speak for all the other writers, but I do in thanking you, Karen, and the Arizona Daily Star and all the sponsors and all of you who are responsible for this evening to give us authors a chance to be seen and heard and read, and just to celebrate the printed word. It's a great honor to speak for everybody on that side, to thank you all on that side for what you've done. And in support of literacy, a wonderful cause. And we are all very, very, very grateful. Now, having said that, it's intimidating in the midst of all these terrific writers that a sports writer would be the one chosen to speak this evening. Many of you have probably heard of a basketball coach best known for his antics in Indiana and now bivouac somewhere in West Texas, Bobby Knight. Bobby once said the best time in every sports writer's life were the 3 years he spent in 2nd grade. So thank you, too, for letting me come and lower the standards here. Sports writing is interesting in journalism. A sports writer is the only occupation in journalism that I know of which is one word. It's as if the subject can't be separated from the journalist. Sports writer, one word. Everything else is 2 words. War correspondent, movie critic, political writer, even sports editor, 2 words. But sports writing is one. And actually, sports writing is not all that different. As a kid, I wrote all kinds of stuff before I got into sports writing. People just assume, though, that sports writers are designated that way at birth. However, this is the secret. Sports writing is the easiest kind of journalism. It's the easiest thing to write. I mean, people want to read you. You don't have to drag them into the tent. Why I would say right now that more men are interested in sports than they are in sex. Certainly this is true of golfers. Now, I don't play golf myself. It always astonishes people when they hear that, a sports writer who doesn't play. It's as if I chose not to use indoor plumbing. But But golfers fascinate me as sort of a subculture in the same way that Margaret Mead was intrigued by the Samoans. And so a few years ago, I did an article for Sports Illustrated looking at golfers that way. And along with the article, we did a very serious survey, very expensive, and we found out that 81% of the golfers interviewed would rather shoot par than spend a night with the most beautiful woman in the world. Isn't that the most terrible revelation you have ever heard? But sports writing is, as I say, easy. There's glamour, there's drama. Somebody wins, somebody loses in every article, and you're dealing with mostly young, vain, and impressionable men who say young and stupid things, which is, the dream of every journalist. You have it handed to you on a plate that way. Of course, everybody thinks that sports writing is just hack stuff, and yes, it's true that sports writing at its worst can be the worst. We have a tendency to use words that aren't employed anywhere else in the language. Like we say frame for inning, and stanza for quarter, and tilt for game. Has anybody, any human being that you've ever met, ever used the word tilt in the English language for game? No, never. And it goes back forever. Jonathan Yardley, the critic for the Washington Post, reviewing old-time sports writing, said it was like a bad dream by Sir Walter Scott. And everybody thinks that there can't be, and that all sports writing must be bad. I find it very interesting that whenever I write anything that's at all good, someone will come up to me and compliment me and say, "Frank, that was good. It was so good it wasn't sports writing." Ergo, if it's bad, it's sports writing. If it's any good, it can't be sports writing. Now, we dress horribly, sports writing. Have you ever seen a clutch of sports writers en masse? I mean, it looked like a bunch of rag pickers, so that we were there the day that the clown died. And John Crook, when he played with the Philadelphia Phillies, said it's easy to be a sports writer. All you have to do is gain 40 pounds and wear clothes that don't match. And now Crook is a journalist after a fashion with ESPN, and he proves that point every time we see him on television. But I am proud that I have succeeded somewhat as a writer of sports and other things, because as a writer, I had a tremendous hurdle to overcome. I had a happy childhood. And if you want to be any good at all as a writer, you shouldn't have that happen. You should have a miserable childhood and then be plucky and overcome it, that unfortunate start in life, so that you can write about it. I've never been plucky at all. I had the blandest growing up. There was no trauma whatsoever. And that's a terrible setback for a writer. What you want is a father who beats you and a mother who is a prostitute but a saint when she's not turning tricks. The other problem I have as a writer is that I'm not a minority. I'm not even a woman. And that's the best other thing that you have going for you if you want to be a writer. Then you can be put upon. All writers have angst, and they want to be that. Alas, I'm probably the least minority person possible. In fact, an Hollywood agent once said to me, "Deford, you are the last of the tall, white, wasp, heterosexual Ivy League writers. I have everything going against me as a writer. I'm a Huguenot. That's the best that I can do in the minority line. Unfortunately, it's been 3 or 4 centuries since the Catholics burned us at the stake. So it's awfully hard for me to gin up any sympathy for me in that area, and nobody knows what you Huguenots are anymore. Nobody goes around saying, I'm a Huguenot American. So that's a first this evening. I didn't set out to be a sports writer. I've never been that interested in games. I mean, we all love games, but TV covers them so much better, and everybody sees them now. And then the other thing is that the athletes themselves, and an awful lot of people say, well, how can you write about sports if you never played the game? Red Smith had the best answer for that. He said, well, if that were true, only dead men could write obituaries. I always wanted to write about people, and that's really the canvas that sports provides so wonderfully. And it's often, or most often, it's not the stars who are the best people to write about at all. The stars are young. Nothing much has ever happened to them. It's the outsiders. I think probably the best people that I ever met in my life was when I did a story on the roller derby. I love the Harlem Globetrotters. I travel with them all through Italy, and whereas I'm not the sort of George Plimpton person who likes to perform with the people that I'm writing about, I played against the Globetrotters. The last night I was with them. We were in Bologna, and I was leaving them the next day, so I figured they couldn't make too much of a fool out of me, and I was perfect because the team they played against, the Stooges, were tall, white, slow guys, and that's what I am. So that was one case where I fit in perfectly. The only other time that I ever performed at Plimpton, I wrestled a bear. I traveled with a bear named Victor up in Colorado in an elongated station wagon with Victor and his trainer. And the bear treated me with a great deal of respect. He'd already beaten like 8,000 people in a row, but there's always a faster gun. And that bear was looking at me like, maybe this is the guy. And then finally I wrestled him and he beat me in about 8 seconds, and after that, that bear treated me with great disdain. But the main thing is not dealing with bears. You have to be very careful dealing with sports heroes. And boy, did I learn that the hard way with another bear. I went down to do a story on Bear Bryant. This is when he was going to set the record for most wins by a football coach, the one held now by the ancient Joe Paterno. And at that time in the great state of Alabama, the people said that the bear walked on water. I think they kind of winked when they said that, but in their heart of hearts, they believed that. And instead, I got down there and found not this icon, but a tired and worn out old man. And he was the first to admit it. Oh, Frank, he said, I shouldn't be coaching. I said, my assistants are doing all the work. I'm just going for this full record. And like a lot of old men, and sorry, I can't be too delicate here, the bear had a problem. He had to go to the bathroom all the time. Now, it wasn't like I was a great investigative reporter to discover this. The bear either talked about it all the time or did it all the time. And so in an article, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 words in one paragraph in passing, I mentioned this, and it was a firestorm from the state of Alabama. Here they thought the bear was a demigod, and I had revealed that he had bodily functions just like the rest of us. And the hate mail poured in, hundreds of letters, a petition sent to my managing editor demanding that I be fired, and most appropriately, it was written on toilet paper. And I also got the best letter of its kind. It was from a Methodist minister, and I give him credit, he wrote it on church stationery. The Reverend so-and-so, such and such, Methodist Church, so-and-so, Alabama. It was very pithy and to the point. Dear Mr. Deford, it said, whenever your parents would like to get married, I would be delighted to perform the ceremony. Don't mess with sports heroes. Actually, the apogee, the apex of my career as a sports writer was when I was selected to be the sports writer on the Light Beer All-Stars. Remember? Tastes great, less filling. And after I did a commercial with Billy Martin, I was invited to the group commercial. I was a little scared because, I'd written about some of these guys and not necessarily kindly. I found out very quickly, though, that they didn't care if the devil himself was in their midst, as long as you didn't do one thing, and that was to blow your lines, because then we had to stay out there and shoot the commercial and couldn't go back to the hotel and drink light beer. The one guy on the All-Stars who was worse with his lines was Bubba Smith. Remember him? Big, tall, defensive end for Michigan State and the Baltimore Colts. Bubba was so bad that one time the line he blew was his own name. I think that's a first in the theater. But better than that, he was doing a commercial one time with Dick Butkus. Butkus told me this story. And the thrust of the commercial was that golf was a more difficult sport than football. And the line that Bubba was supposed to deliver as they walked down the fairway was, "Yeah, it's a lot easier hitting a quarterback than a little white ball." Only time and time again, what Bubba said was, "Yeah, it's a lot easier hitting a little white quarterback." I have been tremendously lucky as a sports writer. I've done so damn many things in so different areas, not just in sports, but all around. HBO Real Sports, with whom I'm with now. I do essentially the same stories on television that I did for so many years for Sports Illustrated. NPR God, I've been with them for 30 years. It's so wonderful because it's such a broad audience. Sports writers don't usually get that. We're over in the ghetto. Yeah. Sports Illustrated, ESPN, the sports pages, sports radio. NPR allows me to talk to people who otherwise, might not care that much, might not listen to sports at all. I mean, and some of them can't stand me, but even them, they're not going to switch over to Howard Stern for 3 minutes. I mean, they're going to bear with me. And I get a number of people who, and as a matter of fact, I've had a couple this evening over at the bookstore. We said, I really don't like sports, but I enjoy it, which is a wonderful compliment. Only a friend of mine, Mike Mushaw, the novelist, made this comment. He said, "Frank, you spent the first half of your career mostly writing articles about people who can't and don't read. That's athletes. And the second half, writing for people who don't know what you're talking about." It's also true that on NPR, no matter how witty and charming and brilliant I am, I come on very early in the morning, and my attention, the attention paid to me, must be shared with people who are brushing their teeth or otherwise performing their morning ablutions, multitasking. I was at a very swanky Eastern college a few years ago speaking, and at the reception ahead of time, the president of the college, a very vivacious, very pretty woman, spotted me, and very loud, spotted me across the room and said, "Oh, Frank, this is the first time I've ever heard you with my clothes on." And I'm sure this will resonate with other writers in the room. It's fascinating to me how people ask us about how do you write. It's such a personal thing and intimate, I suppose, that it intrigues people as if there's some sort of a secret way of doing it. And of course, most of us just sort of sit down in the morning and write. There's really no real magic to it. With me, the only real horror is those NPR commentaries, because there are 52 of them a year. And people say, "Well, how long does it take you to write them?" It isn't so much how long it takes to write them, it's that you're thinking about it all the time. Like, what the hell am I going to do next week? sometimes I get so desperate, I want somebody to die. I understand, I don't mean anybody in particular, just some old jock, please, pass on, and then I can do a eulogy. Of all the things I've written, and other writers here who have dealt in both fiction and nonfiction, I do think the novels are a work apart. They consume you more than anything else. You need time to work on a novel, I think. A nonfiction, you can pick it up, lay it aside, but you have to really get involved with the novel. Victor Hugo, every morning that he wrote, he used to take all his clothes off and hand them to his valet. And that way, he wouldn't let his valet give him his clothes back until he'd, written a prescribed number of words. And since Mr. Hugo had much more success than I did, I thought maybe this is something I should try, but I don't have a valet. And my wife was completely against the idea. And speaking of my wife, who is here, I'm also astonished when I read books and it says in the acknowledgement, I want to thank my dear wife or my dear husband, depending on the gender, for the time that she gave me in working with this and editing my work and copy. Oh my God, I don't understand. I mean, marriage is tenuous enough. I never show Carol anything until it appears in print. Look, only two things can happen. Number one, she can say, oh, this is really wonderful. And I don't believe her and think she's patronizing me. Or number two, she doesn't like it, and then I totally hate her, and there goes 45 good years of marriage down the drain. And who, anyway, would want their wife to be an editor? My God, I have fought editors tooth and nail all my life. I generally subscribe to the view of an old newspaper man named Gene Fowler, who said, every editor should have a pimp for a brother so they would have someone in the family to look up to. I do think, at the end of the day, I think that it's helped my writing, that I've bounced back and forth between all the various forms. Most of my novels are not at all focused on sports, so it gives me a chance to get away. And I think that then when I come back to writing about sports, I do that with sort of renewed enthusiasm. Versatility can be a curse, of course, but the old jack of trades, master of none business. But at least for me, going back and forth from fiction to nonfiction to writing for the eye at one minute and writing for the ear for another, I think that's what's kept me going for so very, very long. And nothing was more energizing to me than my current novel, which is entitled Bliss Remembered, because I not only wrote it as a woman, but as a woman in love. And, that made me try to think like a woman and imagine like one and fall in love like one. And that was a great deal of fun. And so now I think that I have done chick lit. I think I'm the only sports writer who's done chick lit. But anyway, I don't know if there's anything left. No field, I won't say to conquer, but just to dabble in. I think and it's been a great blessing for me that I have been able to jump around through all these genres, and so I think that I'll continue to write, or at least try to, until they put me away in assisted living. Now, Yogi Berra, and what would be a sports writer's talk without a citation for Yogi? Yogi and Phil Rizzuto a few years ago were going to a dinner in New Jersey, and they were tooling happily down the road, and Rizzuto, however, began to get worried. Yogi, he said, I think we're lost. Yeah, Yogi said, but we're making such good time. And taking that as my scripture, I'm going to end. But thank you so much for having me this evening. Thank you so much for all that you are doing for us writers and for literacy. I'm very grateful. Good evening.